Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Excited to have everyone today. Our talk title is How Pfizer Addresses Global Recruiting Efficiency with Artificial Intelligence. We'll have a discussion host format style where Graham, you'll be my victim, and I'll try to play Oprah and ask you just a bunch of questions on the journey to date at Pfizer, how you've kicked off your innovation plans and path of kind of transforming the talent acquisition function, also talent management function, everything from gaining internal buy-in and support for the agenda. How do you take that global? And then kind of what's next for you. So really excited for our discussion today. I know we have a great group on the line. And just a quick intro, I'm Athena, CEO and founder of HiredScore. Most importantly, I have Graham Hardiman here with me today. He's the SVP of Global Talent Solutions at Pfizer. Graham's been at Pfizer for 15 years, played a variety of different roles, and Graham, a variety of different geographies, continents, countries that you've covered as well. Everything from performance management, talent management, diversity, inclusion, talent acquisition, and learning and development falls kind of under your purview today. And then just your extensive HR career from telecom technology companies and of course, pharmaceuticals. So thank you all for joining us today. Without further ado, I think, Graham, if maybe you can kick off the group with just an overview of your transformation journey, coming into an org like Pfizer in the state that it was in when you took over this role, how you thought about where to begin, and kind of the why behind the thesis, the technology, the change would be great.
Excellent. Thank you, Athena. So I think that the story I'll take you through is a true story. So I'm not going to hide any rough parts. There are a few negatives and some things that we got wrong. And I think that some things the company got wrong in the beginning, and then set about trying to correct those when it realized that these functions were probably more important than we realized. So believe me, we don't have all the answers. And some of you all listen to this and think, wow, we did that 5 years ago. Some of you may think, okay, that's interesting. We should probably look at that. So I'm going to place myself right in the middle of that pack. And we by no means have all the answers. But I think we've learned some interesting things along the way. And I'll start off by saying that Pfizer is probably in a position of many large companies, that we have a big brand. And so we have a lot of applications. So a lot of people apply to Pfizer every day through our websites, through our career sites, and show an interest in Pfizer. We carry a lot of positions. So just attrition alone is a big number. And when you add all our restructures and changes in business and movement of people, that grows to an even bigger number. And in the last probably 5 years, we've seen a massive increase in our hiring activity. So heading up to in the region of sort of 20 to 25,000 people going through the process internally and externally. So volume is probably the biggest thing that when I first came into the TA role, volume was the first thing everybody talked to me about. They said they had seen massive increase. We'd seen headcount reductions alongside that increase in volume. And we'd also taken the decision as an organization to push TA into the HR function and localize it. So, and there are many advantages to having a local TA organization, that they're very close to the HR people, they know the marketplace, they know how to make offers, and yeah, some of those things work well. But one of the things that was really obvious was we needed to deal with the volume fast, because we were disappearing under a huge volume of very few people. And the time to fill was pretty slow. The manager and candidate response to surveys was pretty poor. And we were sitting on resumes for hours, days, months before we responded. And that doesn't get you the best candidates and doesn't get you the best reputation. So when I came in, one of the first things I looked at was, how do we address that volume? And many of you will recognize the kind of calls I received in the first few weeks. When someone finds out you're in TA, they pick up the phone straight away and they offer you all sorts of wonderful things. And most people rang me to say, hey, I can drive up volume. I can get you more candidates, more and more candidates. How can I help you? And my response was, that's really the last thing I need right now. So the funnel is full, it's overflowing, and what you're offering me is not what I need. So thanks for the call, but maybe we'll talk again later. So we started to look at how do we address that volume issue. And the first thing we did was to start to identify the biggest markets, understand where your volume is, understand the people working on it, understand where you have resources, and then figure out how do we bring in technology, which was part of my background, obviously, to try and help us address that particular issue. And so the first thing we did was set up a global talent organization. So move away from this embedded TA organization, pull out the big countries, pull out the high volume, and bring those into a global model, which I think had an instant response where we could at least share resources, we could get processes standardized and start to move forward. And then as we got further into that, I realized that technology was the way forward for us, that we needed to look at resumes quickly and move out the 90-something% that weren't relevant to the role, and actually address that volume issue as quickly as we could to get recruiters out of processing paper into doing something more useful. So that was the next step for us. And I'll be honest, I took a slightly different approach to technology, and probably not one you'd find in a textbook. But I went out to the internet and I looked at every kind of technology that was available for TA. And I trawled my way through, along with some of my colleagues, just picking out the biggest names, the most interesting products, and just mapping them on a big spreadsheet to say, what is out there, or what could we use? Which is, most people will tell you to look for your issue and then go find the solution to your issue. I actually thought it was interesting to see what was working and what was successful and where it could play a part in the issues I could see. And that's really where we reached a point where we were looking at a number of different companies, and we decided that the connection with HiredScore was formed at that point, and we started to look at how could we bring that volume under control. So that was really the first few months building that together. Obviously, there were a lot of people changes during that, and what I would say is, when I first came in, people would tell you, we have some good recruiters, some not so good, but actually, most of the recruiters were just people who wanted to do a good job. They knew their role, but they couldn't get to it because they were so swamped in the volume. And I think that's where trying to move forward with the technology to help them made me realize that most of these people were pretty good and actually had joined the company to do recruiting, had not joined the company to shift piles of paper backwards and forwards and process offers. So taking a transformation to them about where we were going was a really important step in that process. Yeah, so I can see chat questions come up. So let me talk a little bit about the technology we deploy. So the HiredScore solution, we initially addressed the US because biggest volume is the United States, followed by China and then India. And actually the global question around how we dealt with the issue was quite interesting, because if you look at the US, then we had a pretty standardized process. We had clean processes, we had Workday. So we knew where the candidates were, we knew where the openings were, and it was pretty clean in terms of data. So implementing HiredScore in the US was probably the smartest thing for us to do and to get that initial volume under control. As we started to go global, I realized that there were some really significant differences and issues. And one of the disadvantages of a localized model that we deployed was that every country was working differently. And if you go to China, for example, when I talked to China and I worked with my emerging markets team out there, then you could see it looked like a very efficient recruiting model, in that you would have one candidate, one interview and one offer, which all of us know is a great recruiting model that probably isn't true. So I soon discovered that the way they were using Workday was different. The way they were working through the processes, how they were using job boards, everything was different. So, and even the way people apply obviously is very different in China. So we actually then set about looking at each country and working out how we could deploy the technology quickly into those countries, but also bring processes in the right way under the global model and try and standardize as many of those processes as we could. I think it was, we're now across a lot of Europe. So we have UK, Ireland, English-speaking countries. We went to one of the first routes. So Australia, New Zealand, UK, Ireland. And now we're moving through into Germany, I think Belgium. So a lot of different countries coming under the model. As we went through, it was interesting to see the Pfizer reaction, because I took a very softly approach initially, because I said to the HR teams, look, if you want to come into the global TA model, that's up to you. We would like to bring in the high volume countries, so we're going to do that. If you want to join us in that, let us show you what we're going to deliver, and you can decide if you want to bring that country or that region into the model. And the reason I did that was I'd always seen people pushing hard to implement global models. And when you do that, it's very hard to drag people along with you, because they feel like they're losing their local control. So I tried to do it in a way where we could show them the advantages and they'd want to join. So that was my philosophy from the beginning. And there's some pros and cons to that, which we'll touch on a little later. But as people started to see the technology being deployed, it was interesting. I got a lot of calls from countries to say, hey, I've just seen the implementation in the US. I'd really like that here in Australia. Could you include us in the rollout? So having a global model really helps in standardizing technology and rollout and standardized processes. You lose a little bit of that local nuance, which takes some doing. But one of the things I saw was, for example, in China, we had a very strange discussion where they said, we're actually building a really, really smart system, which is very similar to HiredScore. It's going to be the same. We're building it ourselves. It's going to be ready in 2 weeks, which is like, wow, this is impressive. I can't wait to see it. And then we implemented HiredScore, and then several weeks later, the Chinese team said, yeah, okay, I'm not sure this is working. So could we reconsider coming back into the model? So it was interesting to see the localized solutions being built, but they weren't really very successful. So I think seeing one global solution is a huge plus, and that was a big driver for us.
Yeah, and I don't know if you covered this, and apologies as our power went out, but just how do you measure that it's working? So I think one thing that was really interesting when you and I met was this, how you sell your vision, and then how you measure the vision and how you quantify that to the business, and maybe just a discussion on kind of the pain the business felt and the ways you were going about solving that with technology as a piece, but actually very few of the recruiters that are transformed recruiters were replaced, and you used mostly what you had there. So I think that'd be a great perspective for the group.
Yeah, and I touched on a little bit on that. And the people we had were not bad people. They were people struggling with ridiculous volumes. They would carry 100, 125 recs at any one time, and sometimes more. And you knew that they couldn't spend time with managers. They couldn't talk to candidates. They really couldn't do anything other than push paper from one place to another. So once we started to reduce that volume and reduce that screening process for them, they were able to then spend more time there. What we saw with the manager surveys we ran, we went from 3.2 out of 5, which was a falling number, by the way, when I came to us. It was on its way down each month to 4.2 out of 5. And 4.5, I think, is the most recent one we've just had. So we've seemed to have completely turned around the manager perception and the candidate perception. And that really is because they are seeing the right level of volume and the right level of candidate coming through the process. And I'll give you a great example of it. I remember sitting with a medical director who, he called me. I was walking by his office and he said, Graham, just come and let me show you this. He had printed 50 resumes of medical people, printed every single one out of Workday. And they were sitting there in a pile on his desk, and it was a huge pile. And he said, I have to go through these. So what kind of recruiting process is this? You know, what is this? And I said, yeah, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. I said, well, what about that? You'd be spoken to the recruiter. He said, yeah, they were very happy to send them to me. So you can see the that was the process that was in place. And because we have such high volume of incoming, that it really wasn't sustainable. So as we started to see the HiredScore process working and the screen candidates coming through, much smaller number, and the recruiter feeling like they could see over the edge of the cliff for once, then we were able to get that under control. And then other countries start following into that model. And the recruiters actually, it took a little bit of time with some of them. One of the things I drove hard was the super user, to make sure that people really use the system. And we had some reluctant people who wanted to work how that always worked. And we had to apply a little bit of gentle pressure. Actually, just pressure. Just to say, look, I'm watching. I think that's all I said was, the leaders said, Graham's watching who's using the system. And that was probably enough just to get people to say, okay, I'll go and have a look. And once they used it, you found that they were in and they were working and their numbers went up very quickly. That was kind of approach. Sorry.
Well, I think also one thing you talk about is also the additional benefits of technology investment is people sense that you're investing in them. Does that help you attract good talent in the door? Does that change the profile of the HR function, in the org?
Yeah. It was really nice to be able to go to the HR leadership meetings and update people on the first AI tool we had in HR. And it was exciting for you because, we were pretty traditional in terms of data and we were seeing what was happening. And so introducing an AI tool, being able to show its use and demonstrate it was fabulous. And I think people got on board quickly with that. We actually used an interesting model to finance it, which was almost like we would send out the cost to the businesses. So we used to charge through a shared account. So for the number of the volume you have for your business unit, we would cross-charge you for some of the technology. And we kind of switched them out of paying for contractors, which was our traditional model. We'd hire a bunch of contractors and charge the business when we had high volume peaks. We would now buy technology and charge them out for the technology. And that made it a little easier for us to finance the switch. And interesting, getting people on board with paying for that kind of thing. When you show them the benefits first, we actually did a small implementation first, a pilot, had that running, and then went back for the budget for the bigger implementation, which I think was a neat way of getting a foot in the door, showing people what it could do, and then they were willing to pay. Because most companies struggle, with paying for things like TA because they often don't always see the value because they know they can hire. I've been able to hire for years. Why would I pay extra money to hire quicker? Which is kind of a weird place to be, but that's the world we all live in, I think, and we have to show our worth every day.
Yeah. Well, I think as a change agent coming into a function that was more, shall we say, traditional, antiquated, in the tooling, technology, and data abilities, maybe just sharing with the group the education you did internally of the why behind this, and do you paint a partial picture? Do you talk about capabilities, or do you paint the vision in its full fruition and then kind of get their buy-in there? So I think that'd be helpful for people.
Yeah, and I'll be completely transparent that one of the things that did change was most of the leaders. So we had a couple of leaders. I brought in some new leaders, people who were actually within the organization, so promoted a couple of people up. And we split out by business units so they could really see global ownership of a business unit. And then we painted the picture and we worked with the TA teams to say, what do you want to look like in 2 years, in 5 years? What does that look like to you? Do you want to be doing what you're doing today, or do you want to be doing something different? And to be able to paint that picture as a function that was recognized by the business and really appreciated for what they do, the thing they felt most was unappreciated and just lost in the organization. Every time there was a headcount change, you would lose some recruiters. So to actually promote TA as a proper function within the HR team, and to actually promote them up alongside HR, not to feel like there was some subset of, I think made a huge difference. People felt pride in TA.
Yeah, so I think this the notion of how you transform. And actually something that's really interesting is not just about tools and technologies, also about your data, right? And so I think you've gone through a really interesting journey in thinking about what data should we collect, what data aren't we collecting that we'll need, where does the lack of data collection and a lack of process actually create an opportunity to think totally outside of the box. And so I think it'd be great to share with our attendees on that topic as well.
Yeah, so I mean, for the first time, we were probably seeing data that we had never really seen. We had some data out of Workday, as you're probably all familiar, you know, it wasn't very clean. Every time I ever got data, you know, I'd ask a question and they'd come back and say, oh yeah, actually that wasn't right. There's some different data, which was a little depressing because you could never really get to the bottom of the numbers. I think what we saw with HiredScore coming in was we were able to deliver on real numbers and interesting trends and data that we really hadn't seen before. And actually that led us to asking questions about where we could go in the future. And I think that's you know, where you're going a little bit, Athena, that it always, for me, I was trying to think of where do we take this now? Because we've got good data, we're starting to see good progress, but where could we go next? And where could we use different pieces of the technology to solve particular problems? And we would have some very interesting conversation. I'm sure Athena at times was pulling her hair out as I would reel off some issue that I had that I wanted to fix. And sometimes, you know, you were able to help us. Other times, I know, you know, you probably put the phone down and said, that guy's slightly crazy, and we'll just tell him we can help and then go away and hide, because we don't do that. But it was always interesting to be able to have those conversations, because, you know, you start to help with the development of the product, but also meet the needs of what we're trying to do day to day. And I'm sure we're not alone. And I saw a couple of the questions coming up about how you deal with certain countries, how you structure your model. I'm sure you're all having similar things where, and one of the questions I saw just popping up on the chat was, do you do a regional model? Do you do business units? How do you manage the countries? So for us, I studied that for a while and I couldn't figure out the exact answer. And I don't think there is a perfect answer to how you structure the organization globally. But the way I looked at it was, if I run the business units globally, and we had 4 of the biggest business units globally, I still needed emerging markets and what we call international developed, which is mainly our European markets. So I still needed those regional inputs because things were so different in those markets. So we run a global model vertically, and then I have 2 regions running horizontally. So the global markets are still the US and still include the US, but then I also run IDM and emerging markets as 2 cross-cutting business. So I have two leaders that run those 2 markets. And that really just also aligns up with the HR team so that we get some consistency about how we work those markets. But they work very closely together. So if we have a manufacturing push, let's pick a relevant one. So if we have a vaccines push and we're hiring a lot of people in vaccines, whatever would make us do that, then we're hiring them globally. So my science lead will work very closely with the emerging markets and the IDM lead to actually pull together the plan to recruit those vaccines people across the globe.
Graham, I think something that's really interesting is when you think about kind of the next steps of your innovation plan, right? So one was tackle the volume, let the people focus, and deliver better quality to the business, and just gain the credibility that TA deserves, I guess, if I was to sum up what I missed just knowing you. And I know that actually talent mobility, talent management, your people kind of becomes this next shift. So so it would be great, I think, for those on the phone and those joining us to hear a little bit more about, you know, how you think about that next step, and then, you know, both a AI-powered talent management, but also your very interesting program that I think people would love to hear about, the PLI, and measuring. I've never heard a company measure breakthrough, and the impact that that's had on your org. I think, especially as you do truly breakthrough work right now, would be great.
Okay. So let's cover the next phase for TA first. So the big push for me is the area that always drives me crazy in TA, and it drives me insane because of the cost, is the amount of money we spend with external agents. And I'm sure you're all the same. And the managers will dive off to Spencer Stewart, Russell Reynolds, Corn Ferry, and they'll spend $100,000 without batting an eyelid, but they'll refuse to pay for a contractor for 12 months. And it's like, whoa, what are we doing here? So, and I always knew from working in the business as an HR lead in the business that you have to prove yourself as a sourcing capability. And I think the sourcing piece was our next phase, to say, okay, if we can get ourselves out of the volume, we can now get into sourcing, and we can prove ourselves by knowing the business, knowing the talent, and sourcing people instead of going out to headhunters. So that's been the big push for us. And to ride on top of that, the implementation of Fetch with HiredScore is the ability to source internally talent, because we have 90,000 people, and strangely, I do not know all of them. So occasionally somebody will slip through the net, and I'll think, I don't even know who that is. So we needed a way of finding those people when we start sourcing for difficult to fill positions. So being able to reach into the database of people that we have internally and pull those people out when we are sourcing difficult positions is crucial. And I think, in the vaccine space is a good example of that. And also, as we, like all big companies, we restructure every 18 months, 2 years, and throw all the pieces up in the air and see where they land. And I think for us, that creates also a lot of noise around deployment. So when you reorganize, we always go layer by layer, and we displace people, but then we want to try and find them positions in the organization. And this is something that Athena and I talked about recently, where I said, look, we're about to do a big restructure. I'm going to have a pool of people. And it was kind of like a light bulb moment of, oh, hang on a second. We can help you with that, because if those people register in that pool, we can then make sure anything you post picks them up and places them in the process. So, and for us to be able to tell our colleagues that, hey, look, your role today has gone away, but actually we're actively going to be trying to source you through these processes into new positions, sends a really positive message. And it takes away that doubt where people think, are they really trying to help me, or do I have to find every position myself? I'm based in Mexico. I don't know what else is coming up in Latin America. So you have that kind of ability to do that in a more systematic way. So that's been a big plus. And I think we're just in the process of implementing that for our current restructure. So that's the Fetch piece. I'll switch gears a little bit. And this one's going to be a little more out there, I think, in terms of what we've been doing. And the reason I say that is this has been a project that we've been working on directly with the CEO. So this is something every 10 days or so, I would go to the CEO's office, Albert Waller, and have a discussion about this particular project. And it's been running there for about 18 months. So when he took it over as CEO, he said he wanted to measure leadership and he wanted to measure performance. And he wanted to combine those two things and always have them combined. So he could tell who his good leaders were, who his high performers were. And I think he had the issue of, people who perform really well, but treat their people badly, or treat their people amazingly, but never deliver anything. He wanted to try and address those two issues. And we had many challenging discussions about it, because he comes at it from a business perspective, and he kind of ignores all the old HR rules of what you should and shouldn't do around performance management. And so sometimes they were kind of heated discussions. And I remember at one point he put his hand on my arm and said, I know you disagree with me, which with the CEO is always kind of like, okay, this could go two ways. But generally he would listen, but then he would come back and realize that he was still right, which was always an uncomfortable place to be. But we did have some interesting discussions, and we ended up, if you think about the two elements, we took performance first, and we said, if you're going to set goals, which is nothing new, setting goals is completely traditional, but you could only set 6 goals maximum: 2 financial, 2 delivering against our purpose, and 2 operational goals, nothing else. And just to make it harder, I'm going to limit them to 150 characters. And they must have an outcome metric. The outcome metric has to be absolutely measurable to the point where you don't need an explanation. It's just yes or no. So that was his first start point for the whole organization. Everyone must have goals set in that way. And then he said, I don't want people setting goals that are safe. I want people to set goals that are breakthrough and will really be hard to achieve. The stretch kind of concept. So he said, everybody in the company should have at least one breakthrough goal. And it should be something that's so new or so difficult, it's nearly impossible for you to achieve it. And we would score those goals in an aggressive way so that people benefited from having them in their goal set. So that was the first piece. And you know, that sounds simple now I explain it, but it was pretty tough getting to 6 very limited focus goals with outcome metrics. And we launched that at the end of last year. We asked everyone in the company to do it in a new system and in Workday. We had 2 systems because we're progressing from one to the other. And we had 96% complete that process, which for 90,000 people is a phenomenal hit rate. Previously, we'd had less than 50% set goals. So we're kind of on a new plane in terms of the goal setting process. And then we launched a 360 survey on the leadership side. And the goal setting, by the way, is every 6 months. We moved to 6-month semesters because the business has changed that quickly. 12 months seemed like a crazily old-fashioned time. So 6-month goal setting, assess the goals, give a score, move on to the next semester. The leadership survey was based on our leadership values and behaviors. And every people manager would get that survey every 6 months, filled in by their peers, so the people on the same leadership team, and by their direct reports. Every 6 months. And that score would be loaded into the system, would come up as their leadership score, next to their performance score, and then what we call their PLI score, which is the average of the 2. So this is giving us, and we've just completed our first semester of full goals and leadership, gives us a huge amount of data that is coming in on every people manager in the company. So we have 10,000 people managers in the process, and we have so much data, it's unbelievable. We can tell how many breakthrough goals are set, we can tell how many goals were achieved, we can pull every piece of data you can think of, and we can plot them on a 2x2, so you can see who are your best people in leadership, who are your best performers, and we looked at performance over a period of time. We're going to measure performance over 3 semesters, leadership as a snapshot. And it's so new, it's very challenging because the people that you expect to come up high on the scoring don't necessarily come up high on the scoring. And it's challenging managers to say, you set the goals, you measured the goals, and the leadership score is what people think. So it's kind of hard to escape the reality of it. And it's also not filled in by the manager. So the manager doesn't get to score the leadership. So they can just deal with what comes in from the people. So
Graham, it's your peers and your direct reports and your peers, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a question about, do you still measure the no jerk score? Well, I think removing the politics of the direct report and kind of democratizing who grades you and how is giving you guys a fascinating swath perspective that otherwise would probably not be captured, right?
Yeah, and this was one. The no jerks piece is gone, by the way. That was in the previous CEO's. That's a this weather warning now. This is getting interesting. So the no jerks piece is gone. But what we do measure, if I suddenly disappear underwater, you know what's happened. But so what we do measure are the 4 values. We have courage, excellence, equity, and joy. And equity and joy are probably the 2 that really focus on what was actually driving people's behavior and the way they treat people. You can no longer kick down on your team because it's going to come back and bite you in the score. So I saw real change in behavior from senior leaders, which is quite interesting, as they started to see their first round of pilot score. We ran a pilot scheme first. They saw their scores and it made them stop and think, which was, I'll repeat the 4 values. It was courage, excellence, equity, and joy. And I see someone's commenting on the no jerks goal. Thank goodness. You know, when they first announced no jerks, I had the same reaction. I was like, whoa, does that even translate outside of the US? But actually, it probably got more conversation and discussion in teams than any other behaviors, because it spun up something that was real in the company at the time. The equity piece here is very much, equity is looking at things like equity in healthcare provision. It's treating everybody the way you'd expect to be treated. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around equity. We haven't kind of refined it to the nth degree where it's laid out everything, but it is really about the way you treat people and equity in healthcare to reducing healthcare disparities. So the good question, pay equity, no. We do obviously have pay equity results that we've published, but this is not about equality. It's actually a little different, and it's about treating people fairly and equitably. And I think it's had quite a good reaction from the company. People like equity as a value.
Yeah, I see there's questions being asked just to the panelists. Just, if you guys can just ask all so that everyone can see. There was a question about equity and whatnot. But I think, Graham, overall, one of the sports team analogy, that when you talk about from talent acquisition to talent management to people and performance to learning, you know, you have a broader goal, which is the catch-up of HR. And I think would be a helpful analogy to give to the group of just how you think about this broader vision.
When people have asked me about the data we're collecting and what we're going to do with the data, I think the way I've described it is, and I'll use soccer because I'm a European, so it's or football for me. But when you, 10 years ago, if you were the manager of a soccer team, you would send a team out that you'd watched in training. You'd probably have a good idea who your best striker was, your best defender. But it was based on what you watched and who you talked to, the coaches, and you'd kind of make a judgment. And then if you move forward to today, you know, and you watch a Premiership side, they run out with monitors, they have GPS tracking, every piece of training they do, every pass they make is measured for accuracy. Every piece of data determines how that team will play, who plays in the team. Everything is measured and used to get the best performing team on the field. And the way we work today, or prior to having this PLI system, was we were still in the 10-year-old model where the manager would say, hey, these are my best 10. I'm going to keep them and we're going to go ahead and do some work. That's pretty much how it worked. And the way they assessed their goals and performance was also pretty abstract. And it was kind of untechnical. That's the word. So what we're trying to do today is say, we're going to give managers data at their fingertips. So when you come to make a promotion or you come to make a talent move, you can actually see the data in front of you in the PLI system, which says, hey, look, you've got 3 semesters of performance you can look at. You have leadership scores for the last 6 months, 12 months, where you can see their performance as a leader. And actually you may not want to take those literally and transfer the very top scoring one to the promotion, but it gives you something that you can hang your hat on in terms of the performance and the leadership capability. And I think then we start to apply those things back to the recruitment process. We tie them back to the values and start to string together all of those pieces so that we're looking and expecting to see the same things from leaders. And it isn't a kind of neutralizing effect because the values are there to, you know, for everybody, and you've still got plenty of room to be yourself. But actually we're saying these things are important to us, so we're going to measure them. And there's some pushback, you know, HR people don't like using those kind of tools for assessment. And but you know, you also question, well, why can't we use a set of survey questions to assess people? Well, as long as we treat it in the right way and we look at it in the broader picture, it's valid information. So it's been a little transformational and hard for managers sometimes to get their heads around.
And I think, Graham, one of the things is the end-to-end, right? It's the carrot, the stick, if you are measuring these things and you say that they matter, how does that express itself in promotions? How does that get incorporated in who gets identified for new roles? And so I think the life cycle of once you create this data, how do you thread that through, and the end-to-end processes is something you guys have also thought about even from the earliest start of the program. I remember you spoke to me probably a year before you had PLI live and said, if I take this, when I have this live, if it succeeds, can we incorporate that into promotions just hypothetically? And so the end-to-end thinking is also something that I think a lot of leaders in your place maybe view projects in silos or view initiatives in silos versus more holistically.
Yeah, and we started to pull in, the colleague experience and thinking about the whole colleague experience. If you repeat the values and the behaviors all the way through that experience, and they turn up everywhere. So every piece of L&D content we use now is tied to the values. So if I score low on equity in my survey, it takes me straight to the section in the L&D content where I can listen to a podcast, a video, I can talk to someone who scores high in equity. And we're trying to drive that kind of behavior. So it isn't oh my goodness, I've scored low, what do I do? It's now I can actually go and find content that may help me. And that is different. And it gets people thinking along the same lines all the time. And trying to string it together, as you say, it just helps. And having a CEO driving it is probably the biggest plus, because honestly, having him talk about outcome metrics, talk about the value of the behaviors, when he talks about them, everybody takes notice. So from an HR point of view, that made it a lot easier for us to drive the message, although not everyone agreed with him in truth, including some of his leaders. It's been a bumpy-ish ride of driving something that is not popular in some cases. But if everybody said, oh, this is fine, great, let's do it, you probably realize you're not doing anything particularly different.
Yeah. One question we have is, what kind of data integrity issues do you face and how do you address them? And then we had a separate question. Guys, keep the questions coming. They're wonderful. So Graham, I'll let you ask that. And then you also have a question about China, specifically around, can you use this in China? Does it help you hire out of one pool, one requisition? Just the short answer to that is yes, but it does connect to the biggest mistake made that Graham will share with us at the end. So I'll let you tackle data integrity.
I have a series of biggest mistakes. I could write a book on those, but we'll keep it focused. So data integrity is an interesting one. We generate a lot of data, and the good news is it's factual data. So it isn't interpretation. It's scoring. It's captured in the system. The calculations run in the system. So from an integrity point of view, it's strong. What we try and do, we treat it the same way we would do workday data, and we're trying to keep the same HR rules, because instantly, as soon as you start having that kind of data available, people want to see it. And so we said, we need to follow the same rules we have now, which is, if you're an HR person and you look after a particular business unit, you can have access to that. If you're a manager, you can see your team, but that's where it stops. So we kind of keep the integrity of the data and the personal data in that way. But you're right, it's been an area where we've had to stop and think a couple of times and say, whoa, hang on a second. If we start building a data lake of all this amazing information we're generating, who has access to it and what do we use it for? And if you start thinking about paying bonuses or funding bonus levels based on your PLI score, that's got some challenges to it. And we run, our legal team ran adverse impact analysis on the first 2 semesters to see if everything was running the right way. Is there anything that says when you run performance data that women come out lower than men? And we need to be sure that that isn't the case. So far so good. Everything seems to stack up well, but we will continue to monitor that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I think just for this group, kind of one of the biggest mistakes made and kind of the lessons learned was it connects actually to the topic here, which is global change. And I know you touched on this when the tornado shut me out for a second, the hurricane. But coming back to this, single solution, siloed, localized approach, and kind of maybe your thoughts on that, even the accommodation of local practices, but with a wrapper of global standard around it, or global data standard, or global process maybe.
Yeah, so I think if I look back, so when I first took over TA, which is prior to taking the whole of the GTS organization, my reaction, my instinct was to gently bring people into the model and show them the benefits, all those nice presentations, make them feel welcome, and then they all want to come along and join, which, to be honest, worked, but it probably slowed us down a few months, because if we'd have said at the beginning, all right, Belgium, Germany, Austria, you're coming into the global model, had the fight with HR, pull them out of HR and move them to TA, we probably would have deployed technology quicker, in truth. And I look back at that and I think I learned something from that, because sometimes you have to have the confidence just to say, we're going to go do this. It was probably the first time I addressed an issue like that, so I wasn't certain. You know, it could have gone horribly wrong, in which case we could have patched it up and moved on. But I would say move to a global model as quickly as you can, bring people in, be fairly dominant in bringing them in and saying, okay, we are going to work the same way. And because you can tell by my accent, I'm not from the US originally. So I worked in a country and I worked in a region, and then I came to global. In a country, you always tell people that everything is different. Oh, no, we can't do it that way. It's different here. And it's just part of the game. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just convenient. And so I know most of the time when it isn't real, and you can try and bring people to a common ground. I think you need to do that more forcefully, and to bring the global TA model. I totally believe in the global model. I think it's so much more effective for deploying technology and process and simplification.
Well, I greatly appreciate everyone joining our series and our virtual series, and sticking through right in the eye of the storm during this time. I know we did have a lot of great questions, terrific questions. You can find Graham on LinkedIn, and if we get his approval, we'll share his email with all of you guys to follow up. And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and look out for non-hurricane affected Summer of AI series, which will be running on Tuesdays throughout the rest of August. So thank you all so much.